Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to Test Tube Plus today. I'm Trace, and I'm here with my good friend Julian Huguet, also from D News. He is a big fan of renewable energy. He literally has it on his t-shirt. If you haven't tuned in to Test Tube Plus before, this is episode 2 of 5 on alternative energy sources, so make sure you check out the first episode. But is there a best alternative energy, Julian?
In my opinion, my personal favesies is nuclear power.
Oh, nuclear power.
Nuclear power is so cool.
It's just a good source of energy.
It's so amazing and much maligned. And so I am here today because I want to defend nuclear power and maybe change a few minds about all the amazing things it has to offer.
Okay, and since I also like nuclear power, I will devil's advocate your defense of nuclear power. So when it comes to nuclear power, I think we should break down a little bit about what that is. So it's better than coal and gas. I mean, I guess.
Sure.
You're still pulling the fuel out of the ground, right? And it's, of course, radioactive.
Well, as you mentioned earlier, the problem with coal and natural gas is they produce air pollutants, primarily the one we always talk about, carbon dioxide, greenhouse gases affecting the entire planet, so that's bad. And then there's also other air pollutants. In fact, I found a 2013 MIT study that said annually in the United States, 52,000 premature deaths can be attributed to air pollution from electrical generation.
Right.
How many people have died from nuclear power production in the United States? Do you know?
Mean, probably a lot, right? If it's radioactive, and there have been problems in the past, and of course I'm concerned about all of those problems because I am defending nuclear power's horribleness.
Do you consider zero a lot? Because zero deaths have been attributed to commercial nuclear power production in the United States.
Wow.
So civilian nuclear power is actually, comparatively, a lot safer than coal and natural gas.
Zero is a lot less than I would have guessed.
It's 52,000 less than 52,000 annually.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's annually, not just total. 52,000 people annually have premature deaths attributed to air pollution. Zero all time from nuclear production. And nuclear is bigger in the States than you might think. About 19.5% of our power comes from nuclear power plants. There are 99 currently active in the States running absolutely fine with no problems. The only time you hear about nuclear power is when something goes wrong.
That is absolutely true. And speaking of that, things do go wrong. We had 3 Mile Island. We've had Chernobyl in the past, not in the United States, but still a big deal. Mm-hmm. We also had the Fukushima Daiichi disaster in Japan. All of these things are terrible.
Right.
And they produce radioactivity that then is spread out into the environment.
Correct. Fukushima Daiichi, might as well focus on that. That was the most recent. When that happened, a tsunami hit the nuclear power plant, and it destroyed the generators that were needed for the backup coolant system. Reactor overheats, hydrogen gas explosion blows its top, and it releases all this nuclear waste into the environment. However, for us over here in California, a lot of people were worried about nuclear radiation along the coast.
Right.
I live in Los Angeles. I have seen 0 three-legged people over there.
It actually is. I'm really bad at defending nuclear energy, but there's really nothing to worry about when it comes to the radiation from Fukushima Daiichi hitting California.
Over here in the States.
It was terrible for the people surrounding Fukushima and the wildlife in the ocean outside of the plant. However, in anywhere else, it's fine. The levels are so low that it doesn't matter. But that being said, radiation, when people say the word radiation, it freaks people out.
Sure.
And they don't like the idea that nuclear power can have radioactive waste in terms of radiation from disasters, like Fukushima, but also from just radioactive waste in general.
What nobody mentions about the Fukushima Daiichi disaster, though, is there was another nuclear power plant fairly close by. Japan had tons of nuclear power plants. One of these newer ones was hit by pretty much the same earthquakes, similar waves. It was more modern, though. Fukushima Daiichi was from late 60s, early 70s, and the design was more imperfect. The more modern nuclear power plant had no problem with the backup generators and backup coolant system staying online. It didn't overheat, and you heard nothing about it because of that. You only heard about this old power plant, which was also mismanaged. An analogy I really like is a comparison to air travel, right? Airplanes fly millions of people all over the world.
It's the safest form of travel.
It is, technically, and very rarely anything goes wrong because the airplanes are maintained, there's strict regulations, and yet when a crash happens, it's all you hear about, and people are always scared to fly. And I think nuclear has a very similar correlation. It's very safe. It's used much more widespread than people believe. And yet, as soon as something goes wrong, all people want to talk about is how nuclear power is unsafe.
Wow.
But with proper engineering and proper management, nuclear power can be a very safe option.
And that's the key. Very proper management, proper safety protocols. So a little bit about nuclear power. Nuclear power uses small pellets of uranium fuel, usually that's the most popular, and then it takes those pellets and either smushes atoms together using what's called fusion or breaks them apart, which is called fission. Fusion is definitely safer, but we haven't figured it out yet.
Fusion, luckily, is constantly providing us with energy from the sun, but you need a large, high temperature, very pressurized state to get these hydrogen atoms to react with each other, and you need something, the size of a sun. So here on Earth, we haven't managed to keep fusion reactions sustainable. It takes more energy to get them going than it does than they emit.
Real output.
So right now, our technology that we've been using is fission based. We take very heavy elements, we bombard them with neutrons, they split, and the reaction releases energy. We use that energy to heat water, turn it into steam, run it through a turbine, condense the water, do it all over again.
Right.
So you're not producing any greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide or methane, you're just producing steam. That's what's coming out of those big coolant towers that people like.
And is that
Photoshop.
radioactive?
No, it is not.
Oh.
The steam coming out of a nuclear power plant is from a separate loop than the water used to cool the reactor.
Got it.
So the steam that's driving the turbine is not radioactive.
Got it. So here's some data that I found on nuclear power. Each plant is generating about $16 million in state and local taxes. The U.S. nuclear industry generates around $470 million per year, and it generates a lot of power in the United States. I mean, it says here in 1980, nuclear plants produced 250 billion kilowatt hours.
You can think of it in terms of percentage. For the United States annually, nuclear power is 19.5% of our annual power production. Wind is 4.4% of our annual power production, and solar is 0.4% of our annual production. And the problem with these other renewable sources like wind and solar is they can't be scaled up to meet demand as it happens. Nuclear power plant, you can turn up the generator, produce more electricity when you need more. You can't make it sunnier. You can't make it windier. And any energy that you don't use, the way our grid is set up right now, you lose. We don't have any way to store that and use it for later.
But, okay, it's not going to kill anybody around. It's not going to produce problems with the radioactivity leaving the plant as long as safety protocols. So as somebody who's not a fan of nuclear energy in this discussion, what about nuclear waste? I mean, nuclear toxic waste is a huge problem. You have to take these pellets of used nuclear fuel and you have to store them forever. I mean, not literally forever, but longer than even our civilization might last. There's going to be this nuclear waste. And that just seems awful and scary for a lot of people.
That's probably the biggest buzzword is radiation and radioactive waste. And it's terrifying to think of how long these things are going to be radioactive and potentially dangerous. There's a myth that there is no safe level of radiation. You'll hear that trumpeted by a lot of people who are anti-nuclear. That's not true, because being alive, you are constantly subject to radiation. A banana is a teeny tiny itsy bitsy radioactive.
True.
Just a little bit.
Fiestaware
It is.
responds to Geiger counters. The red one. I have it at home.
There's constantly radiation. There is a safe level of radiation that you can be exposed to, but even still, this waste is above that. However, the amount of nuclear waste that's produced is so minuscule. You get so much energy from uranium. The amount that you actually have to dispose of, if you were to take all that high-level radiation, radioactive waste, and put it together, you could fit it in a football field stacked 10 feet high.
That seems like not a lot of waste.
It's not a huge amount. You have to be very careful about where it's stored and watch it very carefully and make sure that it doesn't leak or break out. But I believe that humanity is up to the challenge. And don't fool yourself. Other renewable power sources aren't completely clean. Solar, everybody thinks, is this wonderful, totally clean energy source, but photovoltaic cells produce toxic wastewater. It's laced with cadmium, which is highly carcinogenic and seeps into groundwater if you're not careful about disposing of that too. So nuclear isn't the only one with issues about disposing its waste.
Right. On top of that, and I'm just going to drop this whole defending the other side thing, because I think we can all at this point kind of agree that maybe nuclear isn't the evil thing that we all thought. And I would like to mention that coal produces 1,562 million tons annually of waste. That's way more than nuclear energy.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about nuclear waste, a lot of people picture, I guess The Simpsons, like yellow barrels stamped with nuclear and a big green grossness in it. But in reality, it's pieces of equipment that were used in nuclear plants. It's nuclear fissile material that has been spent, that some of that is also disposed of. But things like wrenches that were used to maintain things inside of the nuclear reactor close to the radioactive center eventually will have to be retired and then stored. So we're talking about pieces of equipment that are radioactive, but they're not so radioactive that they weren't used by humans in nuclear plants all the way up until their retirement.
The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has standards, guidelines on how much radiation human beings working in nuclear power plants can be exposed to, and they've done studies on their risks of cancer over that time, and the increased risk of cancer from nuclear power plant workers is negligible. The amount of radiation that these people are exposed to and working with is basically not affecting their risk of developing cancer at all, just maybe a few more people per 1,000. It's very, very minuscule. And yet you get this abundant energy that doesn't contribute to what I think is the biggest problem we have right now, climate change.
Right.
That's a global issue. That's something that's going to affect food for so many people that can't afford to take a hit in food supplies, and it's going to affect weather and storms, and more people are going to die of heat stroke and all these other problems that are going to be manifest that you just don't have if you have nuclear power instead.
Right. And on top of that, people actually really like nuclear power. The people that don't like it are usually very vocal. But when surveyed, a 2012 study found 57% of citizens supported nuclear power. And in a 2013 study, 81% of citizens who lived near the power plants. So it was in their backyards, to use that kind of term, they were also in favor of it. And I mean, people love this power because it doesn't feel like you're hurting the earth quite as often as when you look over at a coal plant and you see it spewing into the air all the time.
Right.
It's much easier to avoid a football field for 10,000 years than it is to not be able to breathe by the time we get there. So either way, we are both a fan of nuclear. How do you feel about it? Tell us in the comments. Also, you can go find Julian on Twitter if you want to talk to him more about this. Obviously, he's quite passionate. You can find him at jhug00. You can also find me on Twitter if you want to tag me into the conversation. I'm also interested. I'm at Trace Dominguez. Make sure you check out yesterday's episode about why we even need alternative energy sources. But tomorrow, we're going to talk about fusion and what it's all about, how it works. It's going to be really cool. Julian will be here for that too. Thanks for watching.